content in your soil, you're going up to about 80% holding capacity. So this drought that we're currently experiencing really would not be anywhere near the severity of what it is if we had the correct carbon content in our soils.
Can I just stop this for a moment to put in at this point, John? On the way here, you were talking about the microbiological, that the bacteria in the soil are now being found to be a very, very important aspect of our nutrition and also of plant health, something like this. So,
yeah, that's true. But what Luke is saying is that something like this carbon becomes a home for those bacteria. I mean, I personally would probably look at something like a worm tea to inoculate.
Perfect.
You know?
That's we're working with the worm. That's the casing, yeah.
I mean, everything Luke has said I would agree with. We've now so destroyed our soil that we have to resort to remedial action like this. We can't just look at a natural process. But this is a means to reintroduce the thousands of species that there seem to be of microbial life that is essential for that vitality and health. I mean, I would definitely agree with what he's saying regarding the drought. The drought has been created by the denudation, the removal of soil carbon. I mean, most, as he's already said, agricultural soils are less than 1% carbon now. So how is it going to hold water? And if you consider that actually most of our fresh water is held in the soil, never mind the dams and all that, the most important reservoir for water is the soil. It's a buffer, and it feeds our natural systems of springs and boreholes and so on. It feeds the transpiration flow for plants back into the atmosphere. So without that bank reservoir of water in the soil, which is dependent on soil carbon or plants, we're heading for the crisis that Luke was talking about. Not heading, we're in it actually.
And the other one that I'm seeing, which I alluded to a bit earlier on, is those critical aquifers that you're talking about, is how we're poisoning them.
Oh, yeah.
Because the soil is not holding the chemicals back. It's going straight through. It's going straight through down in there. And that is another, I mean, you know, what I find so amazing about this whole thing, and one can get really emotional about it, that when you approach the farm with facts, when you show that here is the water that we've tested, here's the independent test of the water, here's the soil, this is what's actually happening. I don't care.
That's what they say.
Yeah, they do not care. They
should be taken off the land.
Yeah, absolutely. The worst problem that we have in agriculture is farmers.
Yeah.
And I'm a farmer. And it goes back to the education, but they are so desperate, they are so leveraged. I mean, I'm going to the banks, and I'm saying to the banks, hold on guys. FNB, you're holding billions now of agricultural debt. You're the biggest. Okay. What's your, you know, how you got this guy by the balls? What are you holding on to? Well, we're holding on to his land. Okay. But that land's useless. So your asset that you're holding on
is no longer an asset.
Is no longer an asset. You've got to take some of that interest, and you've got to get carbon into it, because A, you're giving the poor farmer, well, agri-businessman, slave, a chance to pay it back, because you can actually start producing something again, and B, at least you're upping the value of your specific choice of torture. So it's guys, absolutely, because this is the way it's being done. And this is what I find so terrifying, is that You know, because everybody's motivated by different things. For me, it's my kids. It's my kids that they motivate me, and the way I see it, they don't stand a chance to one day nurture their own kids at the current trajectory. And the destruction based on a greed, a model of corporate greed, partnered with political ineptitude, partnered with the biggest culprit of all, which is us and our ambivalence to this situation, because that is the only place that we can control. We can't control these corporate moguls, these political buffoons, but we have control over ourselves. We have to be that change. That is the responsibility. But unfortunately, the ambivalence that is out there is, I don't want to know. I don't want to be, don't tell me I don't want to deal with that, you know. That is the only place that we can create changes within ourselves.
I heard a very interesting comment the other day. They said that dinosaurs did not die out because they were hit by a comet. The world was hit by a comet. They died out because they didn't adjust to the changes that resulted in the world being hit by a comet. And that's what's going to happen to us. Or is happening to us, because we refuse to change according to the circumstances that we've got.
And the thing is, we don't need a comet. We're the comet. You know, we really are. We are the comet. We are, at the expense of earning a living, we're destroying the very organism that keeps us alive. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. It defies logic. So unless we now, these corporate businesses consider the environment as an equal partner in everything, there is no future. It's not worth investing in that, and I'm not the first person to say that. Unless we consider the social ramifications of our businesses that we're involved in. You're delusional. These are volatile times. We've got masses, millions of people out there who have been brought up on a diet of sugar and starch, who are dependent on a political system that is so un-African, and an education system that is the worst in the world. So you have a situation where there's no neural activity taking place. There's mass ignorance going on. And everybody's pointing fingers at everybody and stirring the pot. It is dangerous, dangerous times. And that's why you go through 2 gates to get to me. You know, and that's not even safe enough. We are living in incredibly dangerous times. And it doesn't have to be like that. It can change. This radical change, Julie, that you're speaking of, it is possible. But you need to understand that you're talking about generations. You've got to get into the education systems. And it all starts with nutrition. You've got to get your soil right. You've got to get people eating so that they can actually start to receive information again. You know, standing on a soapbox is really just not going to do it. You've got to get into the schools. You've got to get into people's homes. But you're breaking through an incredible gate, a mental shift. And I'm afraid it needs to collapse. That is the way of Africa. Let it collapse and crash. And the sooner, the better, because then the less pain. But this prolonged Chinese drip torture, especially for the kids, is just beyond excruciating now. It's got to come to that end. And I think we have the perfect president to allow that to happen right now. He's the right guy now. He's just the perfect. We couldn't have asked for a better buffoon to activate this collapse.
Health. And once you start depleting a soil of its soil life, it doesn't become possible for the food from that area to have those populations of beneficial microflora in them. It's also, what you're getting now is a wheat plant, for example, in that when we're going through the wheatlands, is so far removed from the original kinds of wheat that were cultivated and eaten by people. And that really applies across the board of all the varieties of food that we're eating, in that most of the products now are hardly recognizable compared to the original varieties that we were eating. But it's even seen and actually become in certain parts quite fashionable amongst chefs that it's the probiotic or the biotic elements, the flora that are contained within a food plant that give it the more subtle and tasty qualities that are appreciated by the fashion in cooking these days and are so vital to our health. It seems strange that we have to go and buy from the chemist a formulation of microorganisms, whereas if we only chose correctly, we could be eating homegrown organic food that contains the same kind of microflora that now a modern person in the city has to go and purchase over the counter at the pharmacy. Yeah, I mean, we have a pandemic of diabetes, a whole lot of other health complaints, an increase in cancers, a whole lot of reproductive problems that can be directly correlated to a poor diet and a diet of often very questionable products, particularly, I would say, on the genetically modified foods. And yet no one is taking any notice of the warning signs that are there where populations are eating those foods. And it's not going to be your chemical tests, like I've seen some comparisons done where there's not a discernible difference in terms of chemical properties between foods, but very little testing is ever done on the biotic component of foods. There are some tests, such as the Brix tests, which are used in the wine industry, which do show a significant difference. But yet it's those probiotic elements, and each of those bacteria have a whole genetic formulation, in a sense, imprint that activates our own health and immune system and gives a resistance to disease. Yeah, but I think what's more important is what we're saying with Luke, Judy, in that, just think of what he's done. Like a small area like that, and he's feeding how many people? 20 people.
Imagine if he
in
did
a
a
sense,
little bit more land and did more. Would feed a lot of people.
But is that the option? To go on a model, you're still going to have to transport everything around?
Yeah, but it could be done nearby where everybody lives. However many people there are, you have that much space.
We have an insane situation where large numbers of people move from highly fertile, well-watered areas into urban slums where there is massive desertification, huge endemics of disease and health problems. They have a poor diet. They live incredibly stressful lives. Whereas if communities were encouraged to develop the areas that they came from, you would have a massively healthier population. There wouldn't be issues of unemployment because you are engaged actively in providing your sustenance and shelter. There wouldn't be any of the same kind of social stresses and so on that exist. And they would be eating healthy food daily, in areas that have the greatest potential. So we've got things upside down, in a sense. We have the Western Cape, where land is the most expensive, and yet, even from a conventional perspective, it's the least productive agricultural land. And yet you daily we have a massive mushrooming of the population on a piece of ground that cannot really sustain it. Both in terms of water, the energy question, we then have compounded problems of pollution, and never mind all the multitude of social issues of a large concentration of people who don't really have employment. It would definitely, I really admire those initiatives that have taken place in those communities to provide food and income, because there is such a premium now on producing food, and the cost of food is escalating almost daily. So those initiatives that have taken place in our high-density suburbs of the Western Cape are actually doing extremely well, in that they are generating a fair income and showing that it is possible to produce food under extreme conditions. And perhaps one of the most remarkable things about the Western Cape is how much it can produce on what is considered, from conventional terms, poor soil. And yet the Cape sustains a massive population and, relatively speaking, has a massive production. And if those kind of efforts were applied in the more naturally fertile parts of the country, this country, I think, would be the breadbasket of Africa. As it stands, we're facing a crisis of having to import most of our food.
I've got the water here.
Well, here you've got living water. If you look at the water, it's moving and swirling and pulsing. There's light and dark. And this is the kind of water that, from a biological perspective, is able to bring nutrients and bring health and carry and sustain life. When you have water that has gone through an industrial process, the molecules of water are in a chaotic state and are not able to carry the active minerals or nutrients that they are. They also don't have the health-giving properties that a living water like this would have. And water such as this has the abilities to sustain plants, whereas water that is being denatured and with life destroyed out of it is not able to sustain life, or you certainly need a great deal more volume than you would with living water such as this.
Have you ever seen the results of the difference of plants fed with one and plants fed with the other?
The most dramatic example of that really occurs with rainfall. It's extraordinary. Like the other day, we had a light rain of less than 3 millimeters in the garden that I'm responsible for nurturing at the moment. And yet for 2-3 days afterwards, there was no need to do any irrigation, and all of the plants perked up noticeably. There was a visible increase in growth and a kind of vibrancy to the foliage of the plants in the garden. Whereas you can, during the more harsher periods when there was no rainfall, you can irrigate like mad, and somehow that vitality in the plants was not as evident as a mere shower of 3 millimeters of rain.
What do you put that down to?
Living water is that water that goes through the natural water cycle and is activated by the process of precipitation, the flow forms that are taking place in cloud, and so you have biologically active living water. Whereas water that's gone through an irrigation system is contaminated with pollutants. It's dead water, it's been sitting in a reservoir, so it's not circulating, and simply does not have the quality that natural rainfall has on a plant.
If you were to make a proposal of what is the best way of utilizing our precious water in a time of extreme drought, in the best possible way we can to produce just the most nutrient foods in the best way, how would you recommend we spend that water?
Well, we have a number of anomalies. We use massive volumes of water in industry. We use massive volumes of water in domestic situations. We have a situation in the Western Cape where water is distributed at random through the townships without any charge. And it's not surprising then that you find that in the Western Cape is using almost up to 40% of its capacity water a year. And actually the highest proportion is to the city. I mean, I think it's a fallacy that the farmers are using it all up. It's urban developments. One of the most inefficient uses of water takes place on a thing like a golf course, or what I call green deserts and lawns, where massive volumes of water are pumped out onto a surface. They then move through the system and end up causing drainage problems. So our design on the water system is short and lacking. I know for certain that the same amount of water that is applied, for example, onto a golf course could sustain quite a number of hectares of food production. And I mean, what I've seen with a polyculture organic system, a hectare of organically grown food can yield about R250,000 per annum of valuable product. That's using last year's figures. And if we consider the inflation of costs of food, that's going to escalate. Compared to the returns from a piece of open grassland on a golf course, I doubt whether the subscriptions are going to match that kind of income generation or necessity generation. Whereas the subscriptions are really just pandering to a very elite selection of the population and not benefiting the population as a whole. And it gets compounded further by the kind of addiction to chemicals that takes place in that kind of environment, of massive applications of fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, and so forth, to maintain that situation. So really, a situation like that is one of, from an ecological perspective, the greatest disasters we're facing. And with very simple planning, if those resources were recycled into a food production system, we would have a great deal more satisfactory situation in terms of nutrition for the population in that area. No, I haven't.
What do you wish for this country?
That it's flourishing. Definitely. That the country flourishes to its potential. I mean, actually, this country has incredible potential. It really does. And that includes the human resources, as well as all our natural resources. It's well blessed with natural resources. It's a splendid place. And it really should be flourishing.
Should governments ban or promote that would work? That would help us get ourselves out of the shit. What would you say? Tell us a few things.
I think it has to start with communities. You have to empower communities to take hold of their own destiny instead of becoming dependents. That's very important, and there's a holistic, it's definitely a holistic approach would be needed. We should thrive on our diversity instead of nitpicking in our diversity. And I'm talking here of populations. Populations should be allowed to nurture themselves instead of forming into lagers that are feeling constantly threatened. I think a rethink on urbanization is desperately needed, personally. It's not a mode that has worked anywhere satisfactorily throughout our cultural history. Most metropolitan cultures have ended up extinct, and we should really learn from that. It seems that we failed to learn from it. I don't think there's an exception to that. We kind of think that New York is beautiful and wonderful and it's going to last forever. But there's no ways a metropolitan area that large, and we could speak of more local urban centers, can sustain themselves. They're entirely dependent on importing their requirements. And with the kind of culture of plundering our resources instead of respecting and nurturing our resources, they're going to run out. Resources are going to run out, and urban centers are going to face even more extreme crises than they're going to face at the moment. And that we should see that. And we should take steps to develop a society where, if you like, the load is spread, and we have many more smaller, more balanced communities.
Population control?
Autonomous versus globalization.
Funny enough, I think there's something very anti-life about population control. That's my own personal opinion.
It's because you've got 5 kids.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it is, but I think there's something anti-life about it. It's true that the escalation of the human population is alarming, but is it alarming because of the concentrations of people in urban centers, or is it alarming simply because of the increase in numbers? Is it alarming because of the plundering of the planet? Okay, that increased population would, in a sense, people think implicitly imply. Or is it actually the industrial mode that is the danger? And personally, I would tend to think it's our industrial mode that is the problem.
So you think it's actually possible for us to continue to have continually and forever escalating population themes?
No, it can't happen.
Then at what point would you say this anti-life thing would kick in?
Nature's going to kick in anyway, whether we like it or not. There will be natural controls coming in. They might be shocking. Maybe they are kicking in with the massive health problems that are occurring in the first world. It's nature's way of kicking back and trying to balance things out. So you could almost say is that high concentration of people is asking for pathology of some sort or another. Some disease, some crisis is inevitable.
Globalization?
Yeah, I think it's an insidious arrangement.
It's terrible.
I do. Because it's
Would you
tied.
would you ban monoculture?
Look, it's on terminology. Generally, look, a golf course is a monoculture. No, I don't think it's healthy. It's elitism applied to plants. So society's elitism is transferred and manifested in its mode of agriculture. It's a kind of elitism, very much so, on many levels: economic, social, product. Eliminate competitors. I mean, what's shocking is the loss of diversity. We should cherish diversity and not eliminate it.
Diversity, smursty, who cares? What would you say to that?
I laugh at the ignorance of the comment. Or I smile. There's a rather sinister element to it, but really shame on the person who is seeing the world like that.
I spoke to an environmentalist who told me, oh no, look, we've already accepted that there's going to be a half the species, but that's okay. Do you think that that is just them being practical, or do you think it's them given basically shouldn't be call themselves environmentalists?
I think they're speaking from a comfortable perspective and have never really faced life-threatening situations. Because if they had faced life-threatening situations, they wouldn't make a remark like that. So that is a very comfortable elitist position. Yeah, there's a smugness to it that's actually tragically unrealistic. That person is extremely naive about how harsh life can be for most of the population.
Do you think we're better off now than we were 50 years plus ago?
No, not really, no. I might even say that we're worse off. I don't think technology has really contributed as much as it makes out that it has contributed. If you consider in the last 50 years the loss of habitat and natural resources, the massive utilization of finite fuel, no. We're still engaged in warfare. No. If anything, I think the desertification of the planet is far more alarming in the last 50 years than it has ever been. And I don't mean desertification, I mean it in every single respect. Creativity, I think, has diminished. So there's been a kind of desertification of creativity. We have mass-produced creativity. And so the initiative of individuals to be creative has been lost. And that, I think, is one of the most tragic things. And then there's desertification, quite literally, of our environment, where environment has become totally degraded. And that has escalated in the last 50 years. I don't think health problems have been solved by technology, as they're allegedly done. I don't think wealth is a very good indicator, because we seem to have almost more poverty than we had 50 years ago. And people might have lived mighty simple lives, but the sense of impoverishment was not there. That has escalated. So even though people lived a lot very simple, humble lives, they were a great deal more content, healthier, and more creative.
What do you teach your children about, what do you wish for your children to do about the future, if anything? Do you think it's not their problem? Or do you hope that they somehow can undo what's been done?
I hope they have the initiative and creativity to deal with the challenges that are undoubtedly going to be presented to them. I think, in a sense, as a guidance with my children, we have had adventures over them. We've tried to teach the children to deal with challenges. And I think that's very important. So, for example, the challenges of a new country, a new language, being able to adapt. So I think that's the most important thing, is to be lively enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And one can only hope that they survive and flourish.
Why is the Ganges almost over? Because the glacier is melting 1,000 times faster than it was predicted to melt. So it's already gone in by about 5 kilometers. Now it's happened now in today's news. You have seen that the Alps have got no snow this year. As the Alps get no snow, Europe gets no water. So it's already upon us. So when we use language like, in 2050 it's happened, nobody for a minute believes A, that they will die, but 2, that they will ever see 2050. Strangely enough, both these beliefs exist in our minds. So if we can say, We are already in the middle of the climate change. We're done, we're finished. It's not only the polar bears who are hanging about on little islands. We are hanging about little islands. If I get 7 million Bangladeshi refugees per year, because Bangladesh is going down, because it's a coastal area, then my life is already over. How can euro can fail today, the rupee tomorrow. How can I stop revolution in my country? How can I stop anything from happening if I'm absolutely inundated with refugees? So what are we talking about? The quality of life is already over. Now it's just life we're looking at. So if we would change our language and realize that we are where we are, right in the middle of it, then perhaps people might work with more urgency. Secondly, if we stop data collection for a little bit and just get on to action. 3, if we stop COP17, COP20, COP92 and just do it as countries, realizing that we are in the middle of a crisis and each country has to deal with it, whether legislation or force or persuasion or what, and call a moratorium, for God's sake, on population building. Instead of giving incentives to having a 5th child, as so many countries still do, and just say, okay, for the next 5 years, we will all not have children, and let's see what we can do with our resources then. I mean, we'll have to do something. The point is nobody's doing anything, because we all think it's still in the future. I mean, the day New Orleans died should have been a wake-up for everybody. The fact that Japan has let radioactive water swish about and all of us are covering it up instead of noticing the huge amounts of fish that are washing up. If we notice the 400 black holes in the ocean caused by just urea, and the US and India being the highest urea users in the world, even that we haven't stopped. Now, in all our economies, methane is playing a biofuel part. There's an intention of every country to increase methane, not decrease it, so that it takes the place of carbon dioxide. Hello? Does that make any sense at all? I mean, India has a proper economic plan to increase methane use. So, again, another long answer. Sorry.
Thank you.
And there just doesn't seem to be any short answers here. I wish I could just reply with yes.
Maybe I'll think of something. The World Preservation Foundation has seen a number of solutions that can actually work, and one of them is the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency have said that the quickest way and the cheapest way to pull down carbon dioxide, to stop the heating, is to plant trees, to grow trees rather, and grass, to take the livestock off all the rangelands, all the pastures of the world. And that would cost only 20% of any other mitigation proposal. Now,
And where do you take this cattle off? Where do you put
two years ago, the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency produced it. I'm happy to get it.
Sorry.
In Africa, 51% of the continent is actually high rainfall savanna. That is, there's more than 3/4 of a metre rainfall. And we're told that with that rainfall, if the savanna was not burned, it would return to woodland and forest. So there we have huge potential to soak up. It's in Africa, fire is used commonly to maintain pastures, to burn out old grasses and stuff. Several times a year they fire.
No, it's used in India as well. It's used in China. It's used all over the world.
Yes.
Fire is used as a method to clean up.
Yeah. So I share your concern, and but I do see these solutions are there, are readily available for us.
I don't see any
And you think we
solution.
should?
I don't see tree planting as a solution that will work immediately. After a tree is not a tomato plant. It doesn't grow in 2 months. I can plant a billion, million, trillion trees. And I will still have to wait 50 years for them to turn into a forest. Right? A tree, 100 trees does not a forest make.
No. But there are many areas that will regrow naturally.
No, I'm saying even if we let it regrow naturally, or even whether we plant them, it's still not a solution that will work for me right now. It will not stop the Arctic from melting. I'm more concerned with the permafrost and the Arctic than I am with anything else. Because if they melt and we've still got the ozone holes there, then nothing stops us from completely going over the edge. So give me a solution that will stop the Arctic from melting, that will keep the permafrost, keep its methane. Give me that solution. Don't give me about putting 5 cattle into a room and letting the grass grow naturally. You know, we're looking at titch button solutions. That's why NGOs do, halfpenny worth of work and then congratulate themselves horribly, Or governments use NGO work to say how well they're doing. But tell me the one solution that will stop the Arctic. That's all. That's the one point we need to go to. Not Durban, not India, not anywhere else.
Subhanallah Gandhi, I have a question from the moderator. In the mitigation strategy... Sorry.
Yeah, tell me.
No, just to follow on this question, you mentioned mitigation strategy from grassland. I'm just wondering if you could share with us your opinion of the difference of changing diet versus a mitigation strategy like that.
If you don't eat, you don't have to take... You see, the Netherlands is suggesting every country has come up with its own crackpot solution, all right, to remove 12% and 15%. US says make pigs with 3 stomachs and cows that have produced less fermentation, right? All the scientific establishment is now working on biogenetics for animals to make them produce less methane. Netherlands, as you say, is saying let's take them all off the pastures and put them into rooms. The point is, whether you put them into rooms or you put them outside, they're going to produce the same methane levels. Yeah? So the best is not to have them at all. And the only way you could not have them is by not eating them. So don't eat them. And by next year they won't be there. And then you can have all the pastures you want. You can have all the regeneration you want. All the fires that are set in our countries are to clean up the areas for cattle, so they won't be set anymore.
So do you think the vegan solution is a real solution?
I'm saying not only is it a real solution, but it's an immediate solution. Within 3 years, you will have given us a breather to work out the carbon dioxide problem. Here we're not even getting the breather.
Yes, South Africa Broadcasting.
There's a lot of even
Sorry,
sort of
can you
my name's Judy Searle. I'm on assignment for 50/50 SABC TV2. There's a lot of people who in the main plenary discussions, the fact that methane is not on the table is really ridiculous. But even what is on the table, the fact that there is so much contesting of everything that is trying to prevent us from using a fossil fuel-based society, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of people who've, as a result, come to think of it as like a conspiracy, that the government's actually working for the oil companies and we just fools who just go along with it and we believe we have democracy because we get a vote once every 5 years. Is there any other reason that you can think of why the world would actually choose to those people who are in there discussing nothing except money, surely they either don't believe it or there's some other agenda. Have you got any idea what it could be? And the second question is the sea. I'm really very worried about our situation in the sea. Can you just tell me what you would have told us if you'd had more time last night about the sea?
Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is that why are people quarreling inside COP? Because not a single one knows what they're saying. They're all career diplomats, career bureaucrats and career politicians, none of whom are scientists and none of whom have actually got any positions except country positions, which are that I will take home more than the other. If you look at the COP from 1 to 17, the same person hasn't attended the next COP, either the same minister nor the same bureaucrat. Most of them, like for instance in India, the person who's coming here was appointed last week. So hasn't got a position at all, except I won't do what my predecessor did. So what you're dealing with is people who are talking about matters they know nothing about.